Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me as usual is Angelo Giuliano, and our special guest is Rasheed. Hello, Rasheed, from the Red Pill Diaries, his YouTube channel. I'm going to put the link in the video description below after the stream. How are you gentlemen doing this, evening for us, morning for you, Rasheed? How are you guys doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you guys?
Right. Yes. We're keeping track of what's going on, especially with the conflict in Ukraine. And I thought what we would do today is actually maybe a little bit of a reaction video to comments made by U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. He was at the NATO conference, the contact group for Ukraine, as his predecessor had done for 3 years under the Biden administration. And the things that he said really does not add up with what I think a lot of people are projecting in terms of their own hope onto the Trump administration. I mean, he talked about everything from continuing, expanding sanctions to continuing to arm and back Ukraine, freezing the conflict essentially, and even establishing a Western occupied buffer zone inside Ukraine, which is what we had been warning about for the last 3 years under the Biden administration. It continues unabated under the Trump administration. Is there any opening thoughts that either one of you would like to say in regards to this before we start playing this clip? Angela, anything?
I think this is we are in a phase where there's lots of bluff from both, especially from the American side, and basically it's a way to put pressure, but what they want to do is a transition where they don't look like the loser, and they basically have a feeling that everything is going to be on the lap of the EU. Because as we've mentioned before, the main objective for the US is to get this Ukraine conflict solved and to shift its focus towards China. That's my main take.
Absolutely. Rasheed, any opening thoughts you have about at least what you've heard so far from the Trump administration regarding the conflict in Ukraine?
I think a lot of it is a bluff. I don't think that America is fully prepared to come out of Europe, regardless of what they're saying. I think that they want to buy time by pushing the Europeans in the forefront, but still maintain the lead or the power behind the scene while they position themselves to go after China, because in their mind, they want to suppress China so that they can then refocus on Russia. China is their main goal, but they want to come back to Russia. They want to pacify this. They want to keep it smoldering until they're done with China, so that they can double back around on Russia.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so obvious, and I hope that, I'm almost certain that Russia understands this, but you never know. I hope they understand this. And one thing I'll point out before we start playing is that Secretary Hegseth even says this is not Minsk 3.0, but literally he's laying out the perfect Minsk 3.0. And when he says that, just for people who might not understand, the Minsk agreements were made between 2014 and 2022 when the Russian special military operation began. And this was the separatists in eastern Ukraine fighting against the Ukrainian military, which was backed by the US and NATO. And the Minsk agreements were meant to pause the conflict because the separatists were decimating the Ukrainian military. It was on the verge of collapse. And so what the US and Europe did was pretend that they wanted to freeze the conflict so that they could create some sort of lasting peace and accommodate the security concerns, the legitimate security concerns Russia had. But what did they admit? The Chancellor of Germany, the President of France, they both admitted that it was just to buy time to reorganize, rearm, and then restart the fighting. So with all of that in mind, let's listen. Everybody in the comment section, please let me know if you hear the audio when I start to play it.
Thank you, Secretary Healy, for your leadership, both in hosting and now leading the UDCG. This is my first Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and I'm honored to join all of you today. And I appreciate the opportunity to share President Trump's approach to the war in Ukraine. We are at, as you said, Mr. Secretary, a critical moment. As the war approaches its third anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end. President.
Okay, so right there, I have no problem with that. That sounds great. And a lot of people hear that, and they heard President Trump on the campaign trail say he was going to end the conflict. And this is what everyone is pinning their hopes on, that this is what is actually going to happen. And this is what he started out by saying. And people will hear that and they'll be like, see, it's going to get solved. But then you have to continue listening. And if any of you guys have anything to say, like maybe just raise a hand or something, I will pause it and you can say what you want to say.
Okay. Trump has been clear with the American people and with many of your leaders that stopping the fighting and reaching an enduring peace is a top priority. He intends to end this war by diplomacy and bringing both Russia and Ukraine to the table. And the U.S. Department of Defense will help achieve this goal.
All right, but what role does Ukraine have in all of this? Anyone who actually understands this conflict understands that Ukraine was always a proxy. It was politically captured in 2014 by the U.S. through regime change operations. And from that point onward, it was shaped and used by the U.S. to pursue U.S. foreign policy objectives, specifically vis-a-vis Russia. So does anyone think that Ukraine actually, I mean, of course, officially you have to have them at the table, but does anyone believe genuinely that Ukraine has a real role to play at the negotiation table? Rasheed, Angelo, do you think that beyond for appearances, do you think that Ukraine has any agency in any of this?
Angelo?
No, absolutely not. Since 2014, we all know that the whole democracy was hijacked, and basically they actually were the one to pick actually the one that would actually be in charge since 2014, and clearly Zelensky is just reading the CIA script. So in reality, it was always a proxy. What we have here is just a comedian which is doing his job as a comedian. He's following the script, and I think he has probably his backup plan just to go to Florida and have some U.S. protection.
My thing is this: if I pay the bills, I call the shots. It does not matter your opinion at all. If I'm paying the rent, if I'm paying the mortgage, if I'm paying the car notes, I make the decisions. The United States is essentially doing that for the entire state of Ukraine. So what he has to say is irrelevant. And I ask the people, when has America ever allowed its proxies or its puppets to overrule what they say? Just name the case. And it's not going to start with Ukraine.
Absolutely. And I think that's important for people to also keep in mind. But I would add to that, very good point. Europe also is a United States proxy. Angelo has brought this up many, many times. The whole point of the European Union was to impose a bureaucracy on Europe to usurp their sovereignty, their agency, to have this bureaucracy that dictates to the local governments and the people living under them. And it's built in such a way that the people have no real way to address it. It's centralized, it's in Brussels. So if you're in Italy chafing under EU decisions, what are you going to go to Brussels to go protest them? So it's a very elaborate system of control, and the U.S. is the one holding the lever. So that's also important. When they say they're dumping it on Europe, they're not dumping it on Europe. Europe is an extension of the United States.
We will only end this devastating war and establish a durable peace by coupling allied strength with a realistic assessment of the battlefield. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing the
All right, fair enough. That's true. And admitting reality is not the same as taking actions to accommodate reality. So he's admitting that there is no way for Ukraine now to take back all of this territory that it lost. There's no way. It cannot happen. The US, Europe, they have no way of enabling Ukraine to do this. So that's true. When he talks about an enduring peace, keep that in mind and then listen to his proposals and see if an enduring peace is even possible.
This illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. This must not be Minsk 3.0.
Okay, so there he said it. It must not become Minsk 3.0. And you have to create the conditions so that the war doesn't start again. So what is he going to do? Has the Trump administration, I'll ask you, Angelo, and then Rasheed, have you seen anyone in the Trump administration actually talk about the real cause of this conflict, which is NATO, its expansion, the US and its use of NATO to first encircle, then contain Russia, and then absorb Russia itself, just as they encroached upon Ukraine's borders and absorbed Ukraine. Have you heard anyone in the Trump administration address this?
No, absolutely not. I think if we were to go into the root cause, it would be a major embarrassment for all the narratives that the average Joe has been fed over the years. So I think they still need to keep the narrative as Russia being the aggressor, and somehow that they need to find a solution to stop the war and so on. But they're not going back to the root cause, which, by the way, Putin wants to do. And I think when you look back at how flexible Putin has been, he's done lots of concessions. He's done concessions on Minsk. Minsk, as you said before, the separatists, they wanted, they were winning the war. I mean, basically, it was a big humiliation for Ukraine because they were losing. And then you have this Minsk that actually saved actually Ukraine. And it puts into this conflict into a status quo. So this was one of the concessions of Putin. But remember, Putin, when he was close to Kiev, he actually made another concessions to retreat, to have a ceasefire and to retreat. And I would say that this time, Putin doesn't have the luxury. I think it is impossible for Putin to not find a long-term solution which would actually solve this conflict at once and forever, because Russia cannot do this again. This is the last time that this should be dealt with, and they need to actually have a framework for the whole Europe, security guarantees, meaning that NATO retreating troops, up to a certain level, and that Russia is not back into a confrontation with the EU or NATO in 5-10 years time.
Rasheed, but very quick, I see in the comment section people saying President Trump has mentioned it, yes, which makes what Secretary Hegseth, what he's about to say, even worse then, because what he's going to say is that NATO needs to be expanded. It needs to be bigger and more lethal. So if you're admitting that NATO is the problem and you're talking about blowing it up in size and capability, then you're doubling down on the root cause of the conflict, aren't you?
Yeah. Trump, he did speak about 2 days ago, and he did say that Biden and NATO were to blame for the war in Ukraine. But that is as far as it went. We have to get to the root. If you don't get to the root, you never find out how the disease works, how and what causes disease, what feeds the disease. I hear the defense secretary talked about we must address the issues on the ground as they are. They're not addressing the issues on the ground in Ukraine as they are. I hear him talking about they want a sovereign Ukraine. Ukraine lost its sovereignty not in 2014. It lost its sovereignty years before that when they were doing color revolutions in Ukraine to overthrow and overturn the elections that were in favor of Viktor Yanukovych, even before they ousted him. So on the one hand, as long as they're winning, Ukraine should be able to make its own decision. But when they're losing, it is, we want a sovereign, independent Ukraine. Well, you could have had that if you had accepted the terms that Russia presented, but you refused to accept the terms that Russia presented. And remember that it was Donald Trump that expedited the funding for Ukrainian troops and weapons prior to Joe Biden. So it's not like he didn't have a hand in this. So it's not all on Biden. It's on Obama. It's on Trump. It's on Biden too. So we have to look at the thing as it is and not just piece it apart and just take what we like. We have to show the whole picture.
Absolutely. Let's continue. That is a very good point. Both very good points there, and let's all try to keep that in mind as Secretary Hegseth continues laying out the solution.
That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5.
So he's talking about no Ukraine in NATO. Fine, but people are saying this is great. This is a huge breakthrough. People have to remember the whole conflict started because that was already the deal. No NATO for Ukraine, and the US, Europe, NATO reneged on it. They waited for the right time where the climate was right for this conspiracy to flourish, and then they went ahead with it. And they said, Ukraine in NATO. Actually, they had a whole list of countries they were going to start adding to NATO after already promising Russia that they would not continue expanding NATO. So this is not a breakthrough. Saying no NATO for Ukraine is not a breakthrough because we've already been there, and the US and Europe, they've already reneged on this promise. And people will say, well, it's Trump. It's different because Trump is different. President Trump himself reneged on an arms control treaty with Russia specifically. We don't have to mention the Iran nuclear deal that he unilaterally walked away from. He reneged on the arms control treaties with Russia, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty. And he lied about Russia not adhering to it as a way to unilaterally withdraw from it. So do you see the problem here? Then he says, let's send European troops into Ukraine. So the creation of a buffer zone, which is what they were talking about under the Biden administration and have been taking steps to prepare for as well. Now we hear the Trump administration, Secretary Hegseth, continuing with this same plan, this same agenda. Anything, guys? I will keep going.
But that's just absurd. That's just absurd. It's an insult to the intelligence of Putin. I mean, basically, it's just reframing this in a different way. But those troops would never be accepted by Putin. It actually would be, the equivalence of a war declaration. He said clearly, whoever is going to send troops into Ukraine is going to be eradicated. So, it's just presenting this in a different form, not under the NATO umbrella or under the US umbrella, but ultimately it's exactly the same. And I would say this role might be fulfilled by the, what Pepe Escobar calls the Chihuahua Baltic states and Poland, the most aggressive. And those actually are absolutely not sovereign state. They're completely under the US control. So de facto, they add up other U.S. proxies because the U.S. controls those states.
Exactly. It's just expanding the proxy war. It's not ending it. It's expanding it, and it's expanding it very dangerously. Rasheed, anything?
And a rose by any other name is a rose. You send European troops into Ukraine. These European troops are part of European nations, which are members of NATO. So they could change it quickly after the troops get there and change. Well, this is now a NATO mission, and if you do this, we can put in Article 5 or Article 6 or whatever. So it's just they're wordsmithing this stuff, and Russia has to be very aware of this and not fall victim to this, because America's the desperate one. NATO, they're the desperate ones because they want to get to China, and they need to get to China because time is running out for them.
Absolutely, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Well, I'm sorry, Secretary Hegseth will get to that in just a moment.
There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear,
I'm sorry, but right there, he's talking about there's going to be a line of contact. So this isn't an enduring, durable peace. This is freezing the conflict. There's a line of contact that needs to be closely monitored. So how is that not just freezing the conflict? So again, wordsmithing, exactly as you say.
As part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine. To further enable effective diplomacy and drive down energy prices that fund the Russian war machine, President Trump is unleashing American energy production and encouraging other nations to do the same. Lower energy prices, coupled with more effective enforcement of energy sanctions, will help bring Russia to the table.
More sanctions. So again, a continuation of the Biden administration. I see people in the comment section saying this is an early negotiating position.
I saw that too.
You know, the whole problem is the very premise all of these negotiations are taking place on, from the U.S. perspective, is all based on a lie, that this is Russian aggression, that the U.S. and Europe are just reacting to this. And again, he will get to NATO here real soon. That this is not an early negotiating position. President Trump, during his first administration, ensured that all NATO members in Europe and Canada also reached at least 2% of their GDP being poured into NATO, and not just into NATO, but into the military-industrial complex. Obviously, that's where that money ends up going.
Safeguarding European security must be an imperative for European members of NATO. As part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Members of this contact group must meet the moment. This means donating more ammunition and equipment, leveraging comparative advantages, expanding your defense industrial base, and importantly, leveling with your citizens about the threat facing Europe. Part of this is speaking frankly with your people about how this threat can only be met by spending more on defense.
So do people listen to that and they actually think, no, this is just 4D chess. This isn't just a continuity of agenda, which continued for all 4 years of the last Trump administration and all presidential administrations. I'm not just picking on President Trump. I'm pointing out that American foreign policy continues no matter who is in the White House. This is the whole point that we're trying to get across. He's talking about more arms, more defense spending, expanding the military-industrial base, which was what they were talking about the last 3 years under the Biden administration, and ultimately not really the Biden or Trump administration. The think tanks funded by the arms industry, who Secretary Hegseth hasn't previously worked for, not that we know of, but I was watching his 4-hour Senate hearing, and there was one point where a senator asked him, you said no general should be allowed to retire and work for the arms industry. There must be like a 10-year waiting period. Are you going to hold yourself to that same standard? He basically said no. He basically said no, because I guarantee you he already has something lined up. So people saying that this is us just not wanting to face reality. Are there facts that substantiate that position, or is it just these people not wanting to face reality, that it's just more of the same? Anyone have anything to say up until now? He's going to start getting into NATO. Rasheed.
Yes, I want to go back to something you said right before you played that clip. You talked about how Trump was instrumental in pushing NATO's military spending to 2%. Now, this doesn't sound like a person that's against NATO, because now he's demanding 5%. And I believe this is a head fake, because you can say, well, they're not carrying their load, but what you're trying, that's literally doubling what you already made them spend on defense spending, which is offensive spending, which means that what you're doing is now trying to build up the military for some reason. At first you demanded 2% and you doubled it plus some for 5%. So this means that you have an objective that you're trying to reach, and it's not a peaceful objective. You understand? To double the defense spending plus some, that is not a person that's intending to disband an organization. That is a person that is trying to build up the armaments and everything that is needed to continue that endeavor of military expansion. I'm just saying.
No, I mean, absolutely. And all along, and again, regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of who controls Congress, there has been all of this talk about expanding NATO, not just to confront and contain Russia, but also to antagonize China on the other side of the planet. I mean, I know people in the audience that have heard these news stories over the last couple of years. So, again, people have to listen to what Secretary Hegseth is actually saying. Stop projecting your own hope that they're going to do the right thing onto them. Just listen objectively to what they are saying.
2% is not enough. President Trump has called for 5%, and I agree. Increasing your commitment to your own security is a down payment for the future, a down payment, as you said, Mr. Secretary, of peace through strength.
And that will be the argument that Trump supporters make, that this is just peace through strength. But let's think about what happened before the special military operation began. Europe depended on Russia for their energy. They were getting cheap energy from Russia. And as a matter of fact, Europe and Russia and China were all increasingly working together. And the US used this conflict that they themselves engineered to break all of that up. And they went as far as literally blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines to stop Europe from cooperating with Russia. And they're talking about sanctions. Well, what more is there to sanction? There's still hydrocarbons coming from Russia going to Europe. So they're going to try to close all of those loopholes. So in reality, Europe doesn't have any threat. What threat does Europe have? None. There's no one threatening Europe. In actuality, it is this conflict that the US has created, has engineered, because it wants to remove the political order in Russia, wants to politically capture Russia, and then it wants to isolate and do the same vis-a-vis China. That is why all of this is happening. You don't need peace through strength, because there was already peace. Anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah,
Angelo?
Brian. It reminds me of Orwellian. 1984. It's war is peace. It's exactly this. And I have it's very clear. What the US is doing, what Trump is trying to do, is actually bluffing, saying, well, I'm going to leave you on your own, Europe. And is using that bluff. So because they've been trying to increase to 3%, 3% of GDP for military spending, they've been putting pressure on that. So what is saying, I'm going to leave you on your own in Europe unless you raise military spending to 5%. And probably this is part of the deal. Is aiming at Europe spending maybe 4 or 3%, and that's the whole bluff. So that's the way I see it. But there's lots of contradictions here, because it's not going to the root of the problem. You see, you want to arm more Ukraine, but in reality, Putin has been extremely clear for the last 3 years. It was about neutralization of Ukraine. So Ukraine becoming neutral, demilitarization, and what he called by denazification, not having a country which is extremely anti-Russian, that is actually threatening Russian population in Ukraine. That's all. Those actually requirements from Putin hasn't changed. Now is just adding oil to the fire, because you are talking about arming more Europe and arming more Ukraine and bringing troops to Ukraine.
Absolutely. And none of this was necessary because there already was peace in Europe. There already was. And it was the US overthrowing the government of Ukraine that triggered all of this. It was not Russia. It was the United States. And then it was the US that forced Europe to go along with this proxy war, just like they're coercing and forcing Ukraine to do it.
We're also here today to directly and unambiguously express that stark strategic realities prevent the United States of America from being primarily focused on the security of Europe. The United States faces consequential threats to our homeland. We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and
Well, hold on. Let him
core
finish.
national interests in the Indo-Pacific.
Okay, there. China doesn't even threaten the American homeland. The think tanks that are actually writing the policy that Secretary Hegseth is parroting admit that China doesn't even have the ability to threaten the U.S. homeland, short of a nuclear exchange. But then he says our core interests in the Indo-Pacific. Look at a map. Where's the U.S.? Is it in the Indo-Pacific? No, it is literally on the other side of the planet from the Indo-Pacific region. I'm talking about Asia. That's what they mean by the Indo-Pacific. And so this is the U.S. And later he will talk about deterring China. This is the U.S. in Asia, imposing itself on Asia, encircling and containing China, just as it has done to Russia, provoking the war in Ukraine. And what they're saying is they need to deter China from doing anything back so that this can continue, so they can maintain the status quo, slowly and surely encircling and containing these countries. So, in reality, he's talking about we can't be in Europe because we simply don't have enough resources to fight that proxy war and the war we're trying to provoke with China. So you guys, you have to help out. You have to do more to help out. This is what he's saying. Anyone want to add anything?
It's a head fake. The United States would never leave Europe the way she said it because she needs Europe. That is the way to try to put pressure on Russia from its west. She's trying to. A lot of people don't know that this thing that's going on is what they call maximum pressure. If they keep troops in Europe, they can put pressure on Russia on its western border. If they go into the Central Asia, they can come up through the south, or if they keep the bases in the Philippines and in South Korea and in Japan, they put it on its western flank. This is all about trying to strain the resources of Russia and China to try to collapse their economies and also to prevent their military capacity from outstripping the U.S. This is what it's about. In America, she can talk about leaving Europe all she wants to. She will downsize a little bit, but she's not going to come out because there's too many priorities there and there's too much at stake there. Because she fears that if she leaves out of there, then China will come with trade. You see what she's already doing with these nations there. She's trying to talk them out of China building networks and railroads and railways. This is a head fake.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because before the special military operation, that is exactly what was happening. And the U.S. said, we need to stop this. We have to do something to stop this. Angela, I saw you unmuted your mic. Is there something you want to add?
Yeah, I think we need to look also at the possibilities of Russia being overextended. So they still need to have this conflict. So they keep on lots of troops in this part of Russia, keeping in mind that, let's say, if there was to be a possible conflict, with Iran, which is a Russian partner, and China or in Korea, we know that there's an agreement between North Korea and Russia. There's a kind of alliance there. So Russia would be overextended. It could not come at the help of China or North Korea. So you see, it's important for the US to keep actually Russia busy on this front.
Absolutely. And again, I'm not going to bring it up on the screen, but 2019, Rand Corporation wrote a whole paper titled Extending Russia. And they have similar policy papers aimed at overextending, overstretching China, even Iran. And it's the same policy. And it just looks different because there's different people and groups and nations involved, but it's the same playbook over and over again. In all of these different areas, people are hyper focused on one or the other, and they don't notice that this is what's going on all over, and that it transcends presidential administrations.
The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes. As the United States prioritizes its attention to these threats, European allies must lead from the front. Together, we can establish a division of labor that maximizes our comparative advantages in Europe and Pacific, respectively. In my first weeks as Secretary of Defense, under President Trump's leadership, we've seen promising signs that Europe sees this threat, understands what needs to be done, and is stepping up to the task. For example, Sweden recently announced its largest ever assistance package. We applaud them for committing $1.2 billion in ammunition and other needed material. Poland is spending 5% of GDP on defense already, which is a model for the continent. And 14 other countries are co-leading capability coalitions. These groups are doing great work to coordinate Europe's contributions of legal assistance across 8 key capability areas. These are first steps. More must still be done.
So he's encouraging Europe to spend more on weapons, and specifically to use those weapons to send to Ukraine. Again, is this just an opening negotiating position? Was that what the Biden administration was doing for 3 years, just setting up their opening negotiating position? No, this is about continuing the proxy war. And he said it out loud. Division of labor, the division of labor for the U.S. empire. They can't do it by themselves anymore. They're not strong enough. They need Europe to work on facing off with Russia, and they need Japan and South Korea, Australia, anyone else that they can politically capture and turn into a battering ram to do likewise vis-a-vis China. That is what he is openly saying to you, to your face. I mean, why does he say the whole, he lays out the whole plan for all to see? It's the exact same plan that was being pushed forward by the Biden administration, the previous Trump administration, and on and on. So how do people listen to him admitting to all of this and saying all of this? Why isn't he exposing this and condemning it? Why is he going along with it? That's what doesn't make any sense to me, how people hear this and they still can't get that this is just more of the same. Am I imagining this?
Most people prefer this allusion to despair. And I noticed that a lot across America. Because we have these predetermined thoughts on everything. Sometimes we box ourselves in where we can't look outside of the box because we're loyal to this guy or loyal to this party instead of being loyal to the truth. And as they say, like on all of the detective shows, motive, opportunity, and who benefits the most. When you look at all of this stuff, use those as guidelines to see if things are changing per administration. They can say that they're going to change, but all one has to do is look. Have they denounced U.S. Hegemonic ways? No. What did Trump say? That he wants to make America strong and to lead. America must lead. And one must ask the question, why must America lead? And does she have any right to lead? Because if you were a chief executive at a corporation, they look at your track record, they look at what you're doing, and they measure you on the merits of your job. And if we were to look at America, we're on the brink of thermonuclear annihilation under America's leadership. So why does America have the right to lead? Those are one of the things that people should look at. And that disqualifies America from the leadership position. And I don't think that the people look at it like this. I think that they are so used to privilege, American privilege, on the back of the suffering of the masses of the people around the world. And we've got to get out of that mindset, because everybody's life matters. Everybody. And I don't think we look at it like that, because the wars are so distant from us. When thousands of people are being bombed or killed, we're not looking at it like that. Their lives matter just like our lives matter. When we're sanctioning people under the guise of democracy, we're breaking up governments, we're overthrowing leaders. And then when we break the toy, we get mad that the toy is broken and we demonize the toy. We don't get mad at breaking the toy or throwing the toy. It's absolutely amazing. But I digress.
No, I mean, that's at the crux of the issue. And I'm not picking on this person, but I just, they're saying, what would happen if arms trade to Ukraine just stopped? They would fold in weeks completely. And do people remember when Obama campaigned on ending all of Bush's wars, and then 4 years went by, he didn't end any of them. In fact, he was starting new ones. And what did Obama supporters say? They made the exact same excuses for their president, for their guy. They were making the same excuses. Oh, the Republicans sabotaged him. Oh, it's complicated. You can't just pull out. And I remember Ron Paul used to say all the time, we just sent our troops there. We can just bring them back. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, you can do that. You shouldn't have sent them in the first place. We shouldn't be arming and backing Ukraine in the first place. So if they collapse in a week, who cares? Why is that a deterrence for people who want to end the war? Why is that a deterrence against ending the war? I don't get it. I think it's just people making excuses because they don't want to admit look, it's human to want to hope, place your hope in change. But you have to be realistic about it. And then you have to be objective while watching events unfold. Is this really change? Am I just rationalizing what's happening to avoid admitting that this is not the change I want? There's nothing wrong with supporting President Trump because you thought he would change things, and then it turns out he doesn't. You're not the one who betrayed people who supported the idea of change. He is. His administration, the special interests they work for, they're the ones who betrayed people's faith in this change. But when you start to see that he's not changing and you start lying to yourself about what is really happening, then you're lowering yourself. You had the right intentions to begin with. Now you're allowing these people to drag you down to their level by making excuses and trying to rationalize why things are not actually really changing. Angelo, you got anything to say? We're almost done with this.
Well, you see, this is a speech. It's only 7 minutes, and we could talk for 1 or 2 hours about this speech, really to analyze what is behind what he's saying. But you see, average Joe is actually very distracted, and he has probably, while watching this, he has a distracted ear, but at the same time, he's picking up on what he wants to hear. So here, he's going to say, well, he wants to stop war. The US is not going to foot the bill. We are going to have the EU to foot the bill, and so on and so on. So basically, you pick up like 3-4 points that are positive, but actually they miss completely the whole message behind this. The war machine is not ending. Actually, it's increasing. They're going to spend more money, and because they want to keep this conflict busy, keep Russia busy here. So and they can and the US can focus on China, and that's the whole problem. You people do not do the work of sitting down and really analyzing every single word. And if you really analyze, there's lots of contradictions there. It seems clear if you're distracted, because you pick up the points you want to hear. But in reality, there's lots of contradiction here. He's saying we want to bring a long-lasting peace, but at the same time, you want Europe to spend more money, and you want to send more weapons to Ukraine. Where it's this whole thing about seek peace through war.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. All right. So let's.
We ask each of your countries to step up on fulfilling the commitments that you have made. And we challenge your countries and your citizens to double down and recommit yourselves not only to Ukraine's immediate security needs, but to Europe's long-term defense and deterrence goals. Our transatlantic alliance has endured for decades, and we fully expect that it will be sustained for generations to come. But this won't just happen. It will require our European allies to step into the arena and take ownership of conventional security on the continent. The United States remains committed to the NATO alliance and to the defense partnership with Europe. Full stop. But the United States will no longer tolerate an imbalanced relationship which encourages dependency. Rather, our relationship will prioritize empowering Europe to own responsibility for its own security. Honesty will be our policy going forward, but only in the spirit of solidarity. President Trump looks forward to working together, to continuing this frank discussion amongst friends, and to achieve peace through strength together.
All right, and that's it. And he literally said he needs Europe to double down on Ukraine. That's what he said. He's not talking to Russia, by the way. He's not negotiating with Russia. He's talking to Europe. He's telling Europe, you need to spend more on weapons. We need more weapons. We need to expand our industrial base, our military industrial base. This is going to take time, so we need to freeze the conflict in Ukraine. Send your troops in there, freeze it, watch the line of contact, and once you're finally matching Russia in artillery shells, we'll get this thing going again, just like we did after the Minsk agreements. So it is 100% Minsk 3.0. It's Minsk on steroids, because they're talking about direct intervention by Europe with their troops. And they're talking about, the reason Europe is not spending more on NATO is because they do have social programs. That's what governments exist to do. They exist to take care of the people who actually live in the country, not bomb the rest of the planet into submission. And so that's what they've been spending their money on. And now the US is saying to them, you cannot do that anymore. We're running out of time. As both of you have said, Angelo, Rasheed, they're running out of time on China. And so they need to hurry up. And, there's going to be some sacrifice from Europe. They're going to have to shift all of this money to arms, ammunition, rebuild their society for war, essentially. And again, none of it makes any sense, because there was peace in Europe, between Europe and Russia, and between Europe and China. Not just peace, but cooperation and trade. And the US deliberately derailed all of that. And now they're coercing Europe into, literally, he said, doubling down on all of this. Any closing thoughts about just this video, Rasheed, and then Angelo?
It just goes to show you the mind of empire. I mean, regardless of administration, and they say this stuff boldly in front of everybody, and most people overlook it. It just shows you that this stuff has seeped into the minds of these politicians to a point where you almost can't remove it, because it matters not who's in the office. All one has to do is look at the policies and actions, and this is leading us down a slippery slope to war.
Absolutely. More war. We already got war. More war. Angelo.
Well, and using those words, empowering Europe. That's a nice word, but in reality, it means, what it means by that is Europe needs to buy much more weapons from the US. And in addition to that, actually, all the negative sides are for Europe. Basically, de facto, it's NATO troops inside, in Ukraine, except the US troops, and you are not covered by the umbrella of Article 5 of NATO. So that means a direct confrontation, NATO and Russia, but that means also a risk of nuclear war, because Russia doesn't have the demographic to fight, and they won't fight. They won't be willing to lose hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers. So this could go rapidly towards nuclear confrontation. So and it was very clear, I think that is the biggest risk we have. But then I would say again, I have the impression that even though most of European states are vassal states, they are controlled by the US, but public opinions, I really think that it's shifting. It is shifting. We see like new trends, like so-called populist parties coming out, and I think the pressure will be bigger. And I'm actually watching some mainstream European news, and they're highly critical. Finally, they start to be extremely critical of the US. I doubt that they will go along with what the US wants. If the US is out, European countries, they don't want to be like fools. I mean, they were fooled by already Nord Stream 2 buying energy and so on. They won't, once the US is out of the picture, they won't go along with providing cannon fodder and footing the bill.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is the whole thing. If there was a real transition of political power in Washington from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, it was very easy what the Trump administration could have done. And I remember the Duran talking about this too. They just said, stop sending weapons and money and everything to Ukraine. Just cut it and walk away, and it'll solve itself. And it would. But what are they doing? They're coercing Europe into spending more. They want to freeze the conflict, spend more to get ready for the next round of fighting. That is what they're actually doing. So people who interpret this as like 4D chess, he had a very clear path toward ending this very quickly. But he chose not to. And then you have to start asking yourself that those last 4 years that everyone makes excuses for President Trump, why he didn't make good on his campaign promises, why he continued all the policies he inherited from the Obama administration. Maybe it's because he's just another politician telling you what you want to hear to get your support and then doing whatever he feels like once he's in office. I think that's the most rational explanation for all of this. If you have anything else you want to say about this specifically, I'm going to post a video later this week with all the links to this video that we just watched and the transcripts to other press conference Secretary Hegseth had. And he just repeats the same thing over and over again. So it wasn't like a slip of the tongue. This is the plan. This is what they're doing. This is what they're trying to sell to everybody. Rasheed, anything? You want to add anything? Let me see. What was the other thing?
I was just going to say that people shouldn't be fooled. The United States has been at war all but 12 or 14 years of its history. And I had a guest on my show, Gregory Manarino. Then I had a few other guests saying that America needs war. She's addicted to war. So these wars are not just by chance. These wars are designed to expand empire. These wars are there to gobble up resources because the empire needs it to continue to go. And remember, and don't forget this part, because I think a lot of this gets lost on America. America and the UK are one and the same. They are tied to the hip economically and politically. That's why almost every war, they have pretty much the same position. That's why when you look at the money system and you look at the gold, it is the New York exchange that is tied to the London exchange, not the other way around. And he who controls the gold controls the economies. So when you look at these two, they're one and the same. So when I say America, I'm often talking about America and the UK. They want war. They have to have it because, as Gregory Manarino said, once the system stops taking on debt and stop taking on resources, boom goes the dynamite. It implodes. And therefore, it needs an ever expanding base of resources and war, and we're watching it in real time.
It's a geopolitical pyramid scheme that needs to constantly expand or it collapses. I think I don't think that's hard for people. I hope it's not hard for people to believe. I want to now, because Secretary Hegseth was talking about China, obsessed with China. I just want to show you how the Trump administration is deliberately escalating with China in an unacceptable way, and in a way that is impossible to explain in terms of 4D chess. This is just continuity of agenda. I'm going to show you this from the US Department of State's website. This was 2022, but this is what it has said all the way up until like this or last week. Like they changed it very recently. And they're talking about US relations with Taiwan. And if you read through here carefully, they talk about America's one China policy. The one China policy means there is only one China. Taiwan is part of China. There's only one government of China, and it's the People's Republic of China in Beijing. Because people don't know this, Taiwan is not a country. It claims to be the sole legitimate government of all of China. It refers to itself as the Republic of China. If you read its actual constitution, it even refers to Taiwan, Mongolia, all of these places as different parts of the China the ROC claims authority over. And so what the US has been doing is playing this double game. They admitted they agreed with Beijing on the one China policy, which means they agree that Taiwan is part of China. Under international law at the UN, Taiwan is part of China. They don't have a seat at the UN because they're not a country. They don't have a seat at many international forums because they're not a country. They are an island province of China. And so another thing that it always said, because this was the actual meaning of the one China policy, they said, we do not support Taiwan independence. Very important, because that is at the crux of the one China policy. There is no independent Taiwan as part of China. Now, the US State Department under Secretary Rubio, this was February 13, 2025. So, I mean, this just happened. If you look through here, it says nothing at all about we do not support or recognize Taiwan independence. And then what they're laying out is a stepping stone toward declaring Taiwan as independent. Now, Angelo lives in China. He has spent time in Taiwan. Angelo, why don't you give your thoughts on this?
Well, this is the salami slicing strategy. They're going bit by bit. It's not done overnight. We've touched upon USAID, NED, all those agencies that have been extremely active in Taiwan, the same as they did in Ukraine. There's been actually a revolution in Taiwan, the Sunflower Revolution. It was back in 2014, and exactly the same time, during the same time that we had Maidan. And back then, I remember Taiwan had never been so close to kind of de facto unification. They were even talking about having a bridge between Jinmen Island. You know, there's an island which is actually far from Taiwan Island, but extremely close to the mainland, and it belongs to Taiwan. And they were building a bridge. I mean, imagine the symbolic of building a bridge between the mainland and Taiwan. And there was this free trade agreement. And overnight, you had those kids coming out in the streets saying, well, we do not want to lose our freedom. We want to maintain our identity and democracy. And, random US flags, and you know what it means. And this is why you have the whole, I would say, civil society in Taiwan that is completely hijacked by those foreign forces. I mean, the US. And massive amounts of money. So what they've done is that from rewriting history books back in 2004 under Chen Shui-bian, the first actually president under the DPP, which is the pro-independence party controlled by the US. Since then on, they've been actually planting the seeds of, basically controlling Taiwan's democracy from media absolutely everywhere. And now you don't have dissent voices. I mean, you have even militaries that actually were put recently in jail because they were denouncing anti-constitutional behavior. Because keep in mind that the Constitution says clearly you are not, there's only one China policy. It's extremely strong. The words are extremely strong. You cannot go against that. So they were denouncing that. And they were put in jail for that. So I think the problem we have in Taiwan is that there are risks. And I would say probably one of the biggest risks we have in Taiwan is that we could have a similar scenario that what we saw in South Korea, having a false flag operation and under the pretext of this fourth flag operation, declare martial law. And then once you declare martial law, you have 30 days where you can do pretty much whatever you want, but you could put the Taiwans into the facto position of independence. And that's the risk. This is why you have lots of internal fights within Taiwan. But when you look at the population itself, they want the status quo. Overwhelming majority wants the status quo, because they know that declaring independence will mean war. So again, that is the problem, and this is why the U.S. is pushing for provocation. And what is good on the China side is time is on their side. As long as the China strategy is actually through engagement, having leverage through engagement, rather than it's the carrots rather than the US is the stick. China thinks, and this is like everywhere, even with their enemies, they think I have to trade with my enemy. This is a carrot strategy. By doing engagement, then we have common purpose, and this is win-win. And then each country have leverage over the other country because you have common purpose. While the US is always the stick strategy. I put tariffs on you, I threaten you, even with allies. So that's a very, very different strategy. So when it comes to Taiwan, China hasn't put any sanctions on Taiwan, no major sanctions. What it does is basically, 50% of Taiwan's export goes to China, and that's how they have somehow the leverage. But when it comes to narrative, they can't do anything. It's completely hijacked by the West.
Go ahead, Rasheed. Go ahead.
I wanted to address something in the audience. It went up fast, but someone said, well, if Taiwan isn't a country, why does it have two presidents? And we could easily apply that scenario to Russia. Ramzan Kadyrov, he's a president of Chechnya, but Chechnya is a part of Russia. And the supreme president of Russia is Vladimir Putin. So I just wanted to put that out there because I don't know if they were being facetious or whatever like that, but I wanted to.
I think they were, yes. but that's a very good point. And and people will say, and even Angelo, you said public opinion regarding the status of Taiwan. The problem with public opinion is that it can be manipulated. And you were just describing how USAID, NED, which, by the way, are still funding programs all around the globe. So people, please check that. I sat and listened to 3 to 4 hours of Senate testimony regarding USAID. They repeatedly said all these programs are still going. They just cut out the woke agenda programs, and everything else is continuing. And people were saying, Brian, NED was closed down. I dream of waking up, seeing the NED closed down, all the groups here in Thailand funded by the NED, closed down, crying on X, crying on YouTube that they have no more money. I dream of that day because then I will close down my channel and then I will go do industrial design, which is my passion. I wish that was true. Believe me, no one wishes it was true more than I. But I just look out my window, not literally, but in Bangkok, they were trashing the streets the same day that people were telling me this. And it's, again, it's you're looking at the process and you're excited by it, but that's because it's theater. It's meant to make you excited. They're hoping that, hold on, I'm just going to start this question here. They're hoping you don't check up on it and see, did the interference actually end? The purpose of doing this is to end the interference. At least that's the purpose we hope it serves. But the truth is, if you look, U.S. interference continues. It's expanding. It's evolving. It's not ending. And during the USAID Senate hearing, by the way, they weren't even talking about interference. I think 2 people mentioned it in passing. The vast majority of it was fighting over fake humanitarian aid and the woke agenda. Anyway, my point, Angelo, was you were talking about the USAID, NED, across Taiwan, taking over the media, taking over education. You've talked about the textbooks in schools. I've had other guests on. Carl Zod talks about this as well. And they're brainwashing people. So what's the point of asking people who have been brainwashed and manipulated whether they want something or not? They're not actually making an informed decision. The decision has been made for them through foreign interference. Democracy, as we always say on this show, is a process of self-determination. everything these people think they're determining has actually been determined by and for Washington. So it's very important to keep all that in mind. And the point of bringing this up, I mean, the Trump administration, Secretary Rubio, betraying its agreement with China over the status of Taiwan. And during his Senate hearing, again, hours long, I listened to the entire thing, and he was talking about how we're just going to keep incrementally trying to get Taiwan out there. We're going to try to get them into forums. We're putting pressure on ASEAN to get them to include them in ASEAN, even though they're not part of Southeast Asia. And that is the plan. And Angelo, you referred to it as salami slicing. This is a term the US uses. They take little tiny slices. It's so small that if China overreacted, if they reacted, it would look like an overreaction because it's so tiny. But if you add it up, that it's actually a huge pile of salami slices that they've stacked up. So this is a huge problem. And this is the Trump administration unambiguously, indisputably provoking war with China. And there's no way you can spin this. It's not 5D chess. It's not an opening negotiating position. Taiwan is China, period. So what else is there to say? The US needs to get out of Taiwan. It's none of their business. And that is at the center of this contention between the US and China. Rasheed, are you familiar with this topic?
Yes.
Is there anything you want to add to this?
Yes. They want to use Chinese Taipei as a battering ram against China to throw China off, to present China as this aggressive nation to the rest of the world, to justify surrounding China and to turn would-be allies to enemies against China. I was reading an article that came out about 2 days ago, and this Orwellian doublespeak is so deep, it's unreal. One of the people in Trump's administration said, we are in a rush to position more troops and more weapons into Asia, where they call it the Indo-Pacific now, but we know the Asia-Pacific area, to prevent war. We need a military buildup to prevent an aggressive China from attacking us or attacking our allies. And do you know that after that article came out, there were other people talking in the same manner as that? This shows me that these are not deep thinkers and they don't analyze stuff. America sees China as the most pressing threat. And if Brian, if you would allow me, there's an article right here on RT. And the title of it is China is main defense priority for U.S. Pentagon. And it says this: Washington should confront rising threats while securing its own borders. We heard the defense secretary, there it is right there. And it says the U.S. intends to refocus its military priorities to confronting China's, listen to this part, growing influence. See, that's the part that they don't like. China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth stated on Wednesday. Speaking in Brussels at a gathering of countries that back Ukraine, the newly appointed U.S. Secretary of Defense signaled a significant policy shift and urged European countries to take the lead, just as you said, in their own security and Kyiv's. Stark strategic realities require Washington to focus on securing its own borders and countering threats from Beijing. What threat from Beijing? The threat that China has now surpassed it as the #1 economy. The threat that China is now the largest trade partner to practically in the entire world. China's the largest investor to the world. China's even the largest trade partner to the very nation that wants to suppress it. They have the five largest banks in the world. They have the largest currency reserves in the world. They have the largest army, the largest navy, and next year they'll have the largest Air Force. These are pressing threats against the American empire, and this new paradigm, this new reality where America no longer can reach her tentacles out everywhere and suppress everybody at the same time and demand total obeisance is what is in her craw. She has to dominate, and you have to be a yes man or else it's unacceptable. She never, look at how she treats Europe. Europe has been faithful to her in her endeavors, her escapades around the world, and she won't even accept them as her equals. If you make her mad, she blows up your pipeline. If you make it bad, I'll sanction you. So now they see China, a non-Western nation, that is now saying, listen, we are an independent nation. We're going to look out for the needs of our people. And we can see that by something that the Chinese did that no other nation has ever done, by bringing 800 million people out of poverty to the middle class. If America would have focused on that, that would have made America great again. Because the HUD, I think it's the HUD, Human Urban Development or whatever, said that it would only take $20 billion to eradicate poverty or homelessness in America. You don't have that for that, but you have 200, 300 billion for war in Ukraine. But China is investing in every area. And they see that example as a threat more so than China's military. Because when people start looking at the investment and start looking at what China's building and the technology transfers and the way they're treating people as equals, the smaller nations, the mid-sized nations, and even big nations as an equal, this sets an example that the West does not want to see, because it shines a light on the true intentions and the true reality of Western policy. And that stands as the biggest threat over military.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, just for an example, in a meeting here in Thailand between Chinese officials, Thai officials, they have someone that is actually speaking Thai. They don't expect Thai people to speak Chinese to them, although there are Thai people that speak Chinese. So it's very interesting to watch. You will never see this with representatives from the US or Europe. They expect you to speak English to them. You will speak English to them or nothing will get talked about. Very few exceptions. There are exceptions. You're talking about China building infrastructure around the globe, building infrastructure inside China itself. And this is one of the reasons, again, the Senate hearings, unbelievable. This is the true nature of the Trump administration. And this is why it is continuity of agenda. Every single one of them took turns accusing China of lying, cheating, and stealing its way to superpower status. And we all know that that's not true. They worked hard. They have a huge population. They have built world-class infrastructure. They have better education, and that is why they're a superpower nation. And to say otherwise is, again, it's a reflection of this sense of inherent superiority. There's no way they could match us without doing something dirty and nasty, because they're inferior. There's no way they could equal us. And just as you said about Europe, they don't even treat Europe as equals. And during the USAID Senate hearing, held very recently, they were all taking turns talking about what can USA do to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, countering the Belt and Road Initiative, which is building desperately needed modern infrastructure all around the globe. So you're saying countering development, countering the building of infrastructure. They admit there's no infrastructure the US can build for these people. They admitted that during the hearing. It was unbelievable. So what they're talking about is literally going out globally to stifle, stop, and in some cases, literally blow up development, which is what China is driving. Then they turn around and try to say China is the threat. It is a threat. It's absolutely a threat, but not to the American people, not to America, a nation state. It is a threat to America, the empire, and the special interests, the tiny percentage of special interests that run it and benefit from it. That is the only threat it poses. Anyone else? We're over an hour. We'll get to the comments. Go ahead, Angelo.
Well, just about the Belt and Road Initiative, the way it works is it is very similar. They were inspired by, there was the IMF and the World Bank, which are actually the real debt trap. So what they do is through those entities which are Western controlled, the interest rates are actually double what China is charging. And this is Reuters source. So double, and basically China does offer long-term, but no strings attached. This is the most important thing. What I mean is that the World Bank and the IMF, which is controlled by the US, they put strings attached conditions which are actually meddling to your own country. So you need to accept to have liberalization, selling state-owned assets, but also you need to accept to have USAID and National Endowment for Democracy to be involved into your own country, meaning that you are going to lose some of your sovereignty, if not all your sovereignty. So China, with the Belt and Road Initiative, has offered the possibilities to build infrastructure at much better conditions, but no meddling. And this is why it's actually completely destroying this globalist, US-centric. Now I think we need to rephrase with Trump. Now the globalist agenda is a US-centric globalist agenda. It's still globalist, it's still imperialism, but different touches, so that's about I have to go, guys. So that was my last thought.
Sure.
But
No
I would say this is also a major embarrassment for the West, because China is delivering. China is not about ideology. I mean, this is a very cultural. China, they need to have tangible results. They're not interested in ideology, and this is like, you live in Asia. Asians are very pragmatic too. They don't care about ideology. So what China is doing is putting a huge embarrassment of Western countries, and actually, in reality, China is the real democracy, because it delivers for its own people. And the benchmark we're using in the West is casting a ballot. And in reality, democracy is not about casting a ballot. It's about the results that are attached to what you're expecting from your government. And those benchmarks, they don't lie. Xi Jinping has 90% of approval. Putin has 80% of approval. Now you look in the West, you have Macron has 20%. I mean, we are, in South Korea, he has 17%. I mean, can you imagine that? And that's, but that's, democracy in the West has become a system of control. You cast your vote, and you have no word to say for the next 4 years. And it's just a joke, because the rules of the game were written by the same people that are working against you. Mm-hmm. So they control the game and the outcome. On the last, that was my last thought. I have to go, guys, but let's do this again. I enjoy really much, like Rasheed. Keep on joining us. I love it. So
yes, absolutely.
Have a nice Sunday.
Be blessed.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Mm-hmm. Okay, I just want to build on something that Angelo was talking about. And he's talking about building infrastructure and the fact that China works with these other nations. And I remember, they were at the USAID hearing. Again, we'll go back to that. They were talking about Chinese debt trap diplomacy. And the reality, though, is if you look at these countries that are being targeted by Chinese debt trap diplomacy, like Sri Lanka, for example, I remember this one very well. If you actually look at the components of debt, the vast majority of it is owned by the Asia Bank, which is actually is owned by Western interests, the IMF, and BlackRock. The vast majority of it, a tiny percentage of it, is Chinese debt, and China is always willing to go back and work with the country to resolve it. And I remember during the USAID hearing, or USAID hearing, they admitted, these countries come to us and they said, when we work with China, they never bother us. They never interfere in our internal political affairs. They never impose anything. They're admitting this in the US Senate hearing. And they said, we just wish that you would do that too. Why can't you do that? And they're admitting that they're always publicly saying China is a threat. They're taking over these countries. But in the Senate, and they know no one's going to listen to a 3 to 4 hour long hearing on the USAID. They know that. They say the truth. They say the truth that China isn't taking over these countries. They're just doing business with them. And that's what scares the US. Again, an alternative to their global spanning system that is eventually going to undermine and then undo that system, forcing the US to continue its existence as a normal nation state among other nation states, not imposing itself upon all other nation states. And when you really think about it, at less than 5% of the global population, why should the US be leading? Who picked them to lead? Right? Rasheed, any other thoughts before we get to the 6 questions we'll get to?
My thing is this. If America is so confident about her democracy, if the West is so confident about their way of governance, just put it up against anything else and let the people choose. If what you have is beneficial to the world, they would quickly choose your style of governance and your way of life over others. You don't have to go and put a gun to someone's head and say, hey, what I have is better for you. If it's better, they will pick it up and they will follow that. That's just natural. But if you put a gun to my head, it's going to turn me away from your way of governance, your way of life, and I'm going to be suspicious of you and your motives. That's all they have to do.
Absolutely. And they know they can't, which is why they always push a gun to everybody's head. I mean, this is so obvious. All right, let's go to the questions here. First question: is the Chernobyl drone strike the most obvious false flag ever seen? I think it's at least in the top 5 recent ones. And again, they're gonna do this. They have to try to do this to keep Russia the bad guy, keep anyone from seeing through what's going on and question it. And they got to keep the pressure on everyone to keep this process rolling forward. So they have to make sure Russia is seen as a maximum threat. I got to look at the details of this. I did see it in the news, but again, it's one of these things that seems like it's constantly happening, constantly having these type of attacks they blame on Russia that don't make any sense. I mean, Russia could have hit it at any time, any number of times. Why just one random drone that didn't even do that much damage from what I understand? It's making sense to me. Let's see here. Comment on Trump suggesting Russia, China, and U.S. to reduce military budget by 50%. I mean, it's obvious. They have no possible way to expand their military industrial output. And nations like Russia and China actually fully use their military budgets. The U.S. military budget is massive fraud, waste, and abuse. I mean, if Doge wants to go look at some waste, go to the Department of Defense and you will find it. And you will spend the rest of your life trying to sort through it, because that is the epicenter. It's like a black hole of fraud, waste, and abuse. If they get these countries to cut their practical budget in half, it will cut their capabilities in half. It's not going to do anything to cut America's capabilities in half. So this is all about tricking. And it makes it look like the U.S. wants peace, but really it's just a trick to strip everyone else down and give them the advantage so that they can go right back to war again.
And also it's to buy time. It's to buy time also, because remember,
yes,
we've seen America's fantastic weapons at work in Ukraine, and we see that they're not all that good. And so what they're trying to do is slow down the decline and slow down the rise of Russia and China, because not only are we watching, but nations and leaders and militaries around the world are watching. And they're seeing the ineptitude of Western leadership, military leadership and political leadership. And they're seeing the disgruntlement within the ranks and files. They're also seeing the decline of morality and the decline of their societies. And they're seeing the weapons are not what they're hyped up to be, especially in real wartime situations. So what they're trying to do is offer a handout, but it's not for Russia or China. It's for the U.S. to buy time. Always remember, when the U.S. is losing or when she's at a stalemate, she wants to negotiate. It is to rest, rearm, and recalibrate. No matter what she's doing, those three R's right there: rest, rearm, and recalibrate. And right now, we see that they are behind China and Russia militarily. And let us not forget that Trump pulled out of that ABM, the International Missile Treaty, right? And that was the direct result of that was the hazelnut missile from Russia. And so and so they're seeing this in real time. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the reason they pulled out of the treaty was because they thought it would give them an advantage, and especially vis-a-vis China, because China has no obligations because it never signed any of these treaties. And you have to think about how insane this is if you just think about it at face value. The U.S. is upset that China didn't sign an intermediate range missile treaty. An intermediate range missile is never going to reach the United States. As a matter of fact, you should hope that all of their missiles are intermediate range. So what they're actually complaining about is China shooting missiles at all of the troops the US placed closer to China than to America's own shores. And again, another illustration of the insanity of US foreign policy, which continues unabated under this current Trump administration. Here's a good question. Does Europe need NATO? Absolutely not. I don't think that it ever needed NATO. You could make a case that there needed to be some kind of check and balance against the Soviet Union. It was a massive bloc, okay. But why was the Soviet Union so paranoid in the first place? You remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? A lot of people don't know this. People are like, yeah, that's when the Soviets just put these missiles in Cuba and pointed them at us. And we almost went to war with them because they wouldn't take them out. Why did they do that? Because the US put missiles in Turkey first and pointed them at the Soviet Union and said, you want to do that? We'll do it to you. How do you like it? People don't even remember that. And so again, they don't need NATO. They never did. And they especially don't need it now. Rasheed, do you think Europe needs NATO?
NATO is supposed to be a defense organization. Well, if you look around the world, all the wars are being started by the United States and Europe. Africa is not invading Europe, except migrants, because NATO bombed the legitimate governments and destroyed all of the infrastructure and all of the things that make governments viable. Latin America is not bombing Europe. Asia is not bombing Europe. So that, to me, that was just a false thing to galvanize the military-industrial complex and to fleece the people of Europe and the U.S. That's what it's about, fleecing you. They want to keep you so preoccupied with enemies on the outside that they can dominate politics and steal your resources on the inside. That's what that's all about.
Absolutely. And don't forget, as Secretary Hegseth said, 2% is a good start. 3 is not enough. 4 is not enough. 5%. That is the magic number. Okay, let's see. Another one. I haven't read these. I'm just going to read them as they pop up here. What are the prospects of America's immediate neighbors, Canada, Mexico, even Greenland, as the American empire shrivels? Not good. No, historically, empires start eating themselves when they run out of victims to target. And I like to compare a nation like the United States to a swarm of locusts and other normal functioning nation states as farms. A farmer sees a piece of land and they cultivate it and they take care of it. And there's a sustainable balance between production and consumption. And yes, the farm is there for the special interests to feed themselves, but they're taking care of everything and they keep it running. The United States as an empire is like a swarm of locusts. It sees a piece of land and it just starts consuming. It does nothing to maintain any sort of balance between production and consumption. It is just consuming. And then once it runs out of things to consume, it spreads out. And that is what the US has done all throughout its history. And now it has reached a limit to where it can spread. Nations are able to say, no, you can't come in here. You can't eat. You can't devour this field. So what happens when locusts run out of stuff to eat? Their population collapses. They go underground and they go to sleep. This is basically what's happening. But before they do that, they're going to eat Canada, Mexico, and Greenland. Let's see. This is Thailand specific. Is Isla and Thailand crying for money? No, they're not. That's the thing. All of these agitators, these organizations that agitate here in Thailand, funded by the U.S. government, none of them are crying about money. It's not an issue. And I had warned over the last several years that these organizations' awareness of NED and USAID funding was growing. Opposition to it was growing. And so what the U.S. started to do is not stop sending them money. They started rerouting it through private foundations and also through European governments, because they understood people were suspicious if they saw Americans show up at a protest, but a little bit less suspicious if it was Germans or Finns coming in and showing up at the protest. So that's what they started doing. They started diversifying and rerouting the funding. So no, they're not going to run out of funding. This whole thing that the Trump administration is doing is theater. In reality, all of the interference continues. I can look out the window and see it still continues. Rasheed, are you tracking any specific examples of U.S. interference around the globe, and have you noticed that it has abated or continues?
Well, I see that they are up in the ante in South Korea and in Japan and in the Philippines, and they're trying to put pressure on Cambodia and the other nations, and it's astonishing that nobody covers this stuff because it is so vital to the world. Because remember, China is the largest trade partner to pretty much everybody. So what happens in China, if China coughs, the world catches a cold now. So it's amazing that Americans aren't more astute to what's going on, because if war breaks out, we have to go back to this. If 95 to 97% of all your goods on the stores, in the store shelves, come from China, what do you think would be a ramification of the war? China will sanction the United States. That means no goods will come to the United States. They will sell the debt. This means an economy that is already bankrupt will go into a tailspin with closures of banks and businesses and massive unemployment. Do we need that? Is that in the security interest? Is that in the national interest of the United States? I don't think so. But when you look at how she's trying to pressure Japan to sanction Russia, how she's trying to pressure Japan to cause trouble with China. Just the other day, she put pressure on Japan to say that China was was causing trouble near the Diaoyu Islands, or in Japan they call it the Senkaku Islands or whatever. And you see little micro steps of escalation, and now and China usually ignores it and continues pushing on. But I think it's going to come a point where China is going to confront it head on. And I don't think America is going to like the results of when China confronts it, because you can only allow someone to do this so long before you are forced to stand up and say, hey, listen, enough is enough. We cannot let you go another step. We can't let you do another thing. If you do this, the consequences will be X, Y, and Z. The same as what Putin did. You know, he said, listen, we need a new defense architecture. We need this. Here's our plan. You can modify it a little bit, but not much, because you have brought us to the brink of war. The United States threw it away. Russia had to respond with the special military operation. I see that in the near future because of this, the buildup, the military buildup. Because, Brian, if I come to your house and I'm outside of your yard and I'm setting up tents everywhere around you, and you and I have hostilities, and I'm bringing guns and I'm bringing everything else, and you know that I want your property, and you know that I've threatened you over and over again, before I get myself put in a position to come at you as a man and as a person who loves the family, you're going to be forced to react to stop me from threatening your livelihood and your family. That's what we're seeing on the near horizon in Asia. The United States is going, they sent emissaries. I got this whispered in my ear a few days ago, Brian, that they're sending people to all of these nations in Asia to try to make them stop being a part of the Belt and Road, and to sanction China, and to stop Chinese investment, which is against their own national interest. The United States wants you to ignore your own national interests because they have something against China, right? It is insane. This can only go on so long before China is forced to react. And I believe when they react, it's going to be something that the world will not forget for a long time.
A couple of things. You were talking about the U.S. forcing Japan to confront China, and also the Philippines and South Korea, even the island province of Taiwan, to confront the rest of China. If you look at the breakdown of trade, they all count China as their largest trade partner. Mm-hmm. And they were complaining during the CHIPS Act because a lot of they have facilities set up inside China to do production. So this is destroying their economy. But I thought very, very similar, in the sense that these countries aren't going to continue to go along with it. I thought that about Europe. but the political capture of a country is done specifically to override that sense of self-preservation. So when Germany watched Nord Stream get blown up and they saw themselves getting sucked into this proxy war in Ukraine, they just kept going along with it. Nobody said no. Nobody is putting an end to it. Nobody across all of Europe is really doing it in any meaningful way. And you were saying about how eventually China's going to have to, they're setting up tents, and you see this and you know what they're going to do. You have to do something before they're fully ready. And I don't know if I can find it here. But everyone should be familiar with Smedley Butler's war as Iraqi. He was a U.S. Marine. He was everywhere. He was on the forefront of American empire all the way back in the 1800s, early 1900s. And he was talking about, hold on. This was before World War II. He was talking about how the U.S. was provoking war with Japan. Let's see. Let me see. Hold on a second. The Japanese, a proud people, of course, would be pleased beyond expression, he's being sarcastic, to see the United States fleet so close to Nippon's shores. Even as pleased as they would be a resident of California, were they to dimly discern through the morning mist the Japanese fleet playing at war games off Los Angeles. So the U.S. was doing it even then. They were doing it even then. And I'm not going to defend the Japanese empire. They were invading and taking over territory that was none of theirs also. But World War II in the Pacific was about two empires fighting over territory that belonged to neither one of them. And the U.S. specifically was fighting against Japan because it wanted to eliminate it as an obstacle for the U.S. to establish control over all of Asia. That was what it was really being fought over. I hope people realize that. Smedley Butler understood that many years ago. And I know it's off point maybe, but when I was a U.S. Marine and I went to Japan and I chose voluntarily to go to Japan, I wanted to see the world, and I'm glad that I did. You see how anti-intervention he was, and you see how he was warning about how the U.S. was provoking war with Japan. They named the military bases in Japan after Smedley Butler, Camp Butler. Can you believe that? I mean, about, how they manipulate the legacy of somebody and almost do it in a way to desecrate what they really stood for. Outrageous. And I'm sure that's not the only example.
And
yes,
Brian,
go ahead.
Let me bring something to the people's mind also. America thought that she could manage China's rise the same way that she did Japan. And once Japan arose to a certain level to challenge U.S. economic dominance, they sabotaged the Japanese economy and blew it up. It imploded. They thought that they would be able to do that with the Chinese, but the Chinese learned the history lessons from history. And so the Chinese escaped that. And this is what has stuck in the craw of the United States. They were not able to sabotage the Chinese economy. So they cannot blow up the economy, which means that they cannot defund the progression in science, the arts, math, and military. And this is what's getting at them right now.
Yes, and again, I think ultimately, and if you listen to them talk, you can see it burning in their eyes that the inherent superiority they believe they have, and how China's rise is a threat to that. I saw another question. I didn't start it, but they were saying something about Marco Rubio is easier to listen to than Anthony Blinken. And I don't understand how that could possibly be true. I cannot stomach listening to either one of them because they're both liars. They're both incredibly arrogant. They're extremely racist, and their worldview is repulsive. And worse than that, they're taking this worldview and putting it to action. And that's exactly what Secretary Rubio is doing at the U.S. State Department right now by just not even 100 days in office. He's already changing the website and reneging on the U.S. One China policy with Beijing. And so, no, I don't know how you could listen to them unless you don't understand at all what's going on. And you're not go listen to his Senate hearing, his confirmation hearing. Listen to him. If he doesn't come across as an arrogant neocon warmonger, then I don't know. Maybe you need to do some more studying, maybe. I think that's about it. Unless you have something else you want to say, Rasheed, I think we will wrap it up. We just, we have to keep an eye on all of this. And we have to remember that the conflict in Ukraine is connected to the conflict in the Middle East, which is connected to the Asia-Pacific. The US is pursuing global hegemony. All of these conflicts are interconnected. Destroying Russia, overextending and destroying Russia isolates China and the flow of natural resources into China over that long border they share. Destabilizing the Middle East disrupts hydrocarbons flowing to China. Again, just think about how important that is to isolate and strangle the Chinese economy, just as you were talking about, Rasheed. And of course, Asia-Pacific, that is the US putting the gun straight to China's head and confronting them head on. So it is all interconnected. We have to keep a close eye on all of it. Rasheed?
Yeah, I want to also, since we just a few minutes, I want to bring people's attention back to West Asia, or what they call the Middle East now. Iran is a strategic card that the United States wants to play, because they feel that if they can overthrow the Iranian government, and they can take a lot of resources, they can interfere with the Belt and Road, and they can be in the underbelly of Russia and China, threatening it from close to its borders. That is one reason why they have their eyes on Iran. And don't overlook, as we look at America positioning for war with China, they will pretty much go after the weakest link of the three, and that is Persia. That's why they are doing what they're doing with Hezbollah. That's why they're doing what they're doing with Hamas. That's why they went to overthrow the democratically elected president of Syria, Bashar Assad. And that's why they keep Iraq unstable and destabilized, because they have an ultimate goal of taking over Iran or breaking Iran so that it is not useful to Russia or China. And so when we're looking at the pressure points, let us not ever lose sight of their goal in West Asia, because if they can accomplish that, they feel that then the empire now has time. But now we have military bases over all of the waterways, over all of the land routes. We now have a huge say in global economics, vis-a-vis the decline of the dollar. We now have a lot of say over each region now. That is what they're going for, because they are desperate and they want to keep the dollar as the preeminent currency, because that is the life's blood of the U.S. empire, of the Western empire. Because whichever way the dollar goes, remember that the British pound, sterling pound, and the euro are tied to the dollar. So if the dollar falls, the Western establishment falls. So that's what we're looking at right now. I just wanted, because we didn't touch on that, and I just wanted to remind people of that.
Yes, and that's important to keep in mind, and that's how we have to look at geopolitical developments. Last question, absolutely last one. Can we soon expect an expansion of state-sponsored terrorist activity targeting key infrastructure projects of the BRICS members like Nord Stream in lieu of direct military confrontation? Yes, that's what the U.S. has been doing all along. They have terrorists constantly attacking the China-Pakistan economic corridor in Baluchistan and Western Pakistan. They have armed militants and terrorists attacking Chinese investments and infrastructure in Myanmar, and all of their opposition groups that they're funding, even in places like here in Thailand. They are openly opposed to Thai Chinese infrastructure projects like the high-speed rail. So yes, that is their plan, and they're going to double down on it. Plus, I think they're also looking for opportunities for direct military intervention, always looking for opportunities to do that. And it is continuing under the Trump administration. It continued all throughout the first Trump administration. So with that, thank you so much, Rasheed, for joining us again. Again, you're welcome to join us every weekend if you want. I sent an invitation to Carl. I'll try to find some other people too that might pop in, Danny Haifang as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to do it again right now. This is Rasheed's YouTube channel right here in the comment section, and I'm going to add it to the video description below the video after we're done streaming. So thank you again. And Rasheed, you doing something? Are you okay? All right. So until next time, bye for now.
Bye-bye.